Well, first of all, I know we've asked a lot of people, and unfortunately we're going to have to ask for some more. I really want to thank the Irish people for cooperating with the new regulations, with social distancing in particular, older people cocooning. It's been very difficult, and I know at the start there may have been a certain degree of novelty and a bit of fear, but I know now there's enormous frustration, particularly for people who've young kids at home, kids with special needs, and then also older people who are stuck in their homes in many cases. But unfortunately, we do have to ask for more because the virus isn't going away. We have seen a decrease in the rate at which the virus is spreading, so we're seeing some success in the rate at which the virus is spreading slowing down. We're seeing some success in the number of people who are reporting flu-like symptoms going down a lot as well. But unfortunately, as people have seen the last couple of days, the number of deaths continues to rise, very sadly, and the number of people who need to be ventilated because they become very ill from COVID-19 is rising too. So we need to continue the current restrictions for at least another 2 weeks. I know that's going to be very difficult for people, but it is the right thing to do, particularly in terms of saving lives.
At the end of those 2 weeks, is there what needs to happen for this to end?
Well,
or to be, not even to end, to be relaxed in some description?
Yeah, well, the truth is nobody knows for sure. All of the modelling that we use to predict what's going to happen with this virus is based on models that would have been used for a flu pandemic. But this isn't an influenza pandemic, it's a coronavirus pandemic. It's different to anything we've seen before, so it's not an exact science. However, having said that, because the curve is flattening, hasn't flattened enough yet, but because the curve is flattening, I am certainly hopeful and optimistic that we'll be able to start to unwind the restrictions starting in May and then throughout the course of the summer. Now, I can't guarantee that. Our best guess is that we're not yet past the peak, but we will peak sometime in April, around the middle of April. And after that, we may see the number of new cases falling off. And what we need to see really is the rate of increase of new cases falling off. It's already fallen below 10%, but we want it to fall lower. We also need to see what they call the R0 go down below 1. We also want to see the number of people going into ICU stabilise so that we know that we have ICU capacity. So there's a number of things we have to look at, and this is all obviously led by the National Public Health Emergency Team. We do it based on public health advice, but I am optimistic that if we stick to what we've been doing for the next 2 weeks, if we continue to do what the public health experts are asking
and presumably
us.
Come that May and all these things are checked or happened or some sort of movement on them has been completed, it'll be in a phased basis. We're not talking everybody's allowed back into the Temple Bar straight away.
Yeah, that's correct. So the restrictions were brought in, if you like, in 3 phases, and the NEFIT are currently working on a plan to release the restrictions in phases as well. So they mightn't be the exact same steps. So we have to look at what we can do that would have the minimum likelihood to spread the virus again, but also have benefits for society and benefits for the economy. And the idea would be to unwind the restrictions in steps. But I also need to be very honest with people. There is a risk that as we unwind the steps, the virus might start spreading again, and we might have to reintroduce restrictions. And one of the concerns that we have, of course, is that if we do release some of the restrictions in May, that might send out the wrong message to the public that it's okay, and people may do things that they weren't doing before. We might see people ease off in terms of physical distancing and coughing etiquette and all of those things, and that's a worry. Because when this started, actually, in many ways, the public were ahead of the advice. Shops closed before they had to. Gyms closed before they had to. People who were older cocooned before they were told to. And that was a good thing in many ways. But the reverse is also possible, that as we unwind the restrictions, that people's behaviours may change. And that's a worry we have.
You mentioned on people taking on the decisions themselves to introduce their own social distancing. And nursing homes were one of the groups that did that themselves. The NHI advised their members, the private nursing home members, to introduce stricter guidelines about who could visit. Now, At the time, the head of NFIS, Tony Houlihan, decided that, or suggested that was the wrong decision. It was a little too early. Do you think, in hindsight, when we see the clusters in a lot of these nursing homes, that maybe he got that one wrong?
Well, when it comes to those things, we're always guided by the advice of the CMO and the NFIT. I think when we look back on this in a year's time or 2 years' time, and we can really understand what happened, I'm sure that we'll find that we got some things right and we got some things wrong. And even the best of us will get some decisions right and some decisions wrong. It's too early to say, really, at this stage, whether or not that was the right or wrong decision, although it did change within a day.
But when you see the clusters now, is that not confirmation that it was the wrong decision?
No, it's not. And we see all over Europe and all over the world that clusters of infection develop in healthcare settings, in nursing homes and in hospitals. So it was always likely that there would be clusters in nursing homes, because this is a virus that targets people over 70, targets people with underlying conditions. So anywhere where you find a lot of old people or a lot of people who have underlying conditions, you're going to have a cluster. It could be as simple as one visitor or one staff member introducing it, and then it spreads. So it was always likely.
But then, do you not slightly regret that it was 3 weeks into the I suppose, more stringent measures, that it was eventually that there was people sat down and discussed how to act on nursing homes? It took 3 weeks before the NFIT really took that seriously. And we see there's a lot of stuff introduced now in the last week, the bailout package, of course, and the new measures. But is that something that, if you'd done it all again, that maybe you would have looked at a little earlier?
Well, I honestly believe we can't make that kind of assessment until we're through this crisis. And, I'm sure once we're through this pandemic and it's over, we will look back at everything that was done and look at what could have been done sooner or later, what worked, what didn't. The truth is, when it comes to a global pandemic like this, it is unprecedented. There was no roadmap, no manual to follow, and all decisions that were made, whether they were decisions made by government or decisions made by the Chief Medical Officer and the NFIT, were made on the best information available. And I don't think we can start to make those calls as to what was done right or wrong or should have been done sooner or later, really, until this is over. You'll see, for example, different countries taking very different approaches at the moment. Sweden taking a very different approach to Ireland, for example. We're only going to know in a year or two when we can do a proper analysis of all of this as to who got it right. But certainly in terms of nursing homes, I know people are very concerned about nursing homes, and a lot of people have family in nursing homes. We're doing everything that we can to support them at the moment to reduce the spread of the virus in nursing homes, and that involves public health doctors going in there, HSC staff going in there, PPE being provided, staff being trained, and there's been a lot of cooperation with the sector in the last couple of weeks.
Is it South Korea that are developing apps that allow, there's some talk that we're looking at something similar,
yeah,
to allow members of the public know if they're in an area where they probably have to take a little bit more precaution?
Yeah, and that's actually the kind of thing we're developing now. We should, hopefully, fingers crossed, later in the month, have an app that will be available to people and also will help us to improve contact tracing. It'll be voluntary, of course. Nobody will have to have it, and it'll only work if you have your Bluetooth turned on. And I think we have a lot to learn, actually, from some of those countries in the Far East, in South Korea, for example, Singapore.
And will that, if you're in an apartment complex, say to you there's 6 people in this apartment complex who have tested positive for COVID-19?
That I don't know. It is only under development at the moment.
But is that the goal of to have a technology that would do that?
Well, the goal really, if you look at some of the countries in East Asia, they learned a lot from SARS. And because of what they learned from SARS, because of the public health infrastructure which they developed, they've been able to manage this pandemic better than European countries and America. And I think, like them, when this is over, in fact, it's already starting, we're going to need to build up a public health infectious diseases control infrastructure like they have in some of those Eastern countries, because a new virus like this kind of comes along every 10 years now. We weren't that much affected by SARS or MERS. H1N1 was serious, but got through it. This is very different, but we may find that we face a pandemic of some sort or a new virus of some sort every 10 years. And we need to have that infrastructure in place. But one thing I'd be very careful about is around people's privacy. And different societies operate in different ways. And one thing that characterises European societies like Ireland is a degree of civil liberty. a degree of personal liberty and a degree of privacy that wouldn't necessarily be the norm in other cultures. And certainly any app that we're developing, it's intended that it will be an opt-in, and people wouldn't be giving out information about themselves involuntarily.
And just on another aspect of this entire thing that you've looked at is the welfare package that you've, extraordinary welfare package, unprecedented amount of money being spent. There is cases, and you've talked about it yourself, some people maybe who are earning more now who are getting this pandemic payment. How do you envisage unwinding all this in whenever that transpires?
Well, first of all, I don't have any regrets about the fact that we put in place a generous welfare package. The reason why we did it really was because a huge number of people were about to lose their jobs very suddenly, with no inkling, no idea the week before that they were about to lose their jobs. And we looked at the sectors that were going to be most badly affected, like retail, construction, hospitality, food, accommodation. And we looked at roughly what 70% of the average wage would be in those sectors. Now, ideally, what we would like to have done is given everyone losing their job 70% of their income up to a certain limit. But there's no way we could do that quickly, administer it quickly. So in order to get people money right away, which is what we needed to do, we just took the average, which was 70% of earnings in those sectors, and that worked out at 350. Now that has created anomalies, that there are some people, particularly part-time workers, who are now better off. But I'd rather have that consequence than the reverse, which would have been trying to develop a scheme that was perfect, but would have left people with no money for weeks. And you see the alternative. We see in the UK, self-employed people are getting nothing till June. In Northern Ireland, people who lose their jobs are only getting £100 a week as opposed to €350 here. So notwithstanding the anomalies that we've created, I think we did the right thing overall in making sure that...
But on unwinding it then, it's set, it's in place for 3 months, but do you
Yes.
envisage it moving beyond that possibly? And then...
Yeah, that's all going to depend on how long this lasts. I would hope that when it ends, most of those people will be able to go back to work very quickly. I don't think it'll be possible to just, again, stop it suddenly. We will have to unwind it. So we're looking at how that could be done. One option is to kind of phase it out, so you wouldn't go straight from 350 to 203 or 205 to phase it down. Another option is to do what we would have wanted to do in the first place, which was to give people a proportion or a percentage of their income initially, and you could work out a system like that over 3 months, but not over 3 days. But I think one thing that I don't think we'll want to change is this concept that when somebody who loses their job suddenly, that they should actually get a higher amount at the start. And it actually used to be the case in Ireland, and it's the norm in European welfare systems, that if you're paying PRSI for years and years and years, if you lose your job in the first few weeks of unemployment, you get a higher amount, 60% or 70% of your salary up to a certain amount for the first few weeks. And that really cushions the blow of losing your job. It's a while before you go down to the basic rate, which is 203 euros in Ireland. So I think that's one thing we'd like to retain. It's not cheap, but it's one thing we'd like to retain as a principle. And that used to be the case actually in Ireland, pay-related benefits they called it, and it was phased out a long time ago. And the second thing is the whole issue around sick pay. Because we were afraid that people mightn't take the time off sick, mightn't self-isolate for fear of losing their income. These are people that don't have sick pay. We brought in this COVID sick pay payment very early on. And I think one of the things that should come out of this crisis is a better sick pay system for everyone. Now, a lot of people get sick pay. People in public service do. People in the private sector, in good jobs in the private sector, get sick pay. But actually, a lot of people don't. And if you're reliant on the social insurance system, at the moment, you have to be out for 6 days before you can get any sick pay. And that's a real problem for people who are on low incomes, who are living week to week. And I remember during the election campaign, I met somebody who worked behind the meat counter in SuperValue. And he said to me that he didn't get sick pay. And it kind of occurred to me then and occurred to me since that particularly people working in food service, the last thing we want them to do is go in when they're sick, because potentially they're spreading infection to customers. And that's not particular to food service. It's true in a lot of customer-facing areas. And I think that's one of the things that we won't want to reverse. But all those things will come with a cost. and we'll have to have a discussion, I think, as a society, as how we're going to pay for these things.
Just on, just moving briefly into the government formation talks, your relationship with Micheál Martin hasn't been great over the years. This document looks like it's going to be signed off on, or probably was when we're printing this, has been signed off in some description. But did you trust Micheál Martin now? Has your relationship come to that level?
Well, I guess I'm going to find out, and the only way we can find out is by forming a government. Like the truth is, for the past 4 years, if not longer, we've been opponents. Actually, my first job in politics was opposition spokesperson for Enterprise when he was Minister for Enterprise, so we've always been in an oppositional role. But in politics you have to be able to work with people. I've had the pleasure now of serving in 2 coalitions, one with the Labour Party, including people I would have been diametrically opposed to, and on some issues, and then more recently with a group of independents. And it takes a couple of months to get to know each other, to find out how the other person works, but usually you can build a good relationship.
But you think you can sit into that relationship where you're Taoiseach or Taoiseach with him as your Taoiseach or Taoiseach? You see that as something that...
Well, like no decisions we made.
Is it a leap of faith for you, or is it something that you've made your peace with now that you think that it will work?
Well, first of all, like no decisions we made on how the Taoiseach-Taoiseach relationship will work, or who goes first, or anything like that. The focus has really been on the policy programme and what the next government can do for the country to get us through this crisis and also help us rebuild and look to the future. But there are 2 things that I'm very definite about. One, it has to be an equal relationship. Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael have roughly the same number of seats, got roughly the same number of votes. It's not going to work, it's not going to last if it isn't an equal relationship, both in terms of the expression of our policy and values, but also positions in government as well. So that's something I'm very firm on. It just won't work otherwise. And secondly, we do need a third pillar. We need a third party in the government so that we can bring in new ideas and new faces, but also particularly so that we have a working majority. And the last thing this country needs is another minority government. We're going to have a difficult couple of years ahead, but also an opportunity to reshape our society and our economy. But that's going to require a government with a majority, a government that can afford to lose a few TDs along the way who maybe can't swallow some decisions that have to be made.
The Taoiseach spoke during the week about, I think he was like radical. People are going to be surprised by what this policy offering that people, and there's talk about the policy document going to the left. Is this a very radical document? And are you concerned that maybe as a more centre-right party that you could lose some of your core vote by signing up to this type of proposal?
Well, I think, first of all, the document isn't agreed. We would hope to agree it next week. It is largely aspirational. It's not a programme for government. And we're very conscious of the fact that we're going to need a third party. So the last thing we wanted to do was develop a programme for government and then sort of serve it up to Labour, the Greens, the Social Democrats, all of whom we want to talk to. So it is aspirational. And of course, when you have a document that's based on what you want to achieve and high-level principles, it can be very radical. When you get down to the nuts and bolts of how you're going to pay for it, how you're going to prioritise, how you're going to get into the trade-offs. Because, the truth is, there isn't anything that a government can't do. But no government can do everything. And people often ask me about some of the things we've done the last few weeks. Why weren't they done before? Or even, I remember during the storms, people would ask me, how come you did these things, but you can't do them every day? The truth is that if government focuses on one single thing, there's nothing it can't do. But in normal times, governments have to do a bit of everything. You have multiple challenges: healthcare, housing, the economy, Brexit, climate action. And we haven't yet got to the point where you have to make those difficult decisions as to how you apportion financial, human and political resources, which are always limited. So this document, I suppose, can be afford to be aspirational. A programme for government is going to have to be a little bit different. But in terms of ideology, which you kind of touched on there, part of the political tradition that I come from believes in the concept of a social market economy. And that is that we recognise that a market economy, being pro-business, pro-enterprise, having relatively low taxes, all of those things, is the best way to generate wealth. But it's not the best way to distribute wealth. And the role of government is to make sure that you build a good functioning society with affordable access to healthcare, education, housing and childcare for all. And that's the role of government, really, to make sure that you have a burgeoning, prosperous market economy that provides wealth, but also that you use that wealth in such a way that gives you a good society. And I think what we're developing with Fianna Fáil is very much in line with that traditional belief in a social market economy. It's not a socialist document. It doesn't call for higher taxes and greater state control, but it's certainly not a neoliberal free market document either. It's very much in the social market economy space, which is very much part of the Christian democratic tradition of politics, and I don't think it's all that far away from what Fianna Fáil believes in either.
You've touched on it before, I think a few days ago, is about the way that actually cutting tax could help the economy bounce back, put more money in people's pocket, get them back out into the shops, the pubs, once it's open. Is that something that you think it can be worked on over the coming weeks and months?
Well, one thing I'm absolutely sure of, something we definitely don't need in the next couple of years is pay cuts or welfare cuts or increases in income tax, because all that'll do is depress domestic demand and make the economic situation worse. We did see in the first government that I was a member of, Michael Noonan, for example, taking that decision to reduce VAT on tourism and hospitality to get rid of the travel tax, and I don't think anyone would argue that that wasn't successful in terms of boosting the tourism and hospitality sector. So you can do smart things with taxes that help to create employment, but they have to be thought through, and there may be other mechanisms by which we can boost the economy as well. Certainly, I want to maintain capital spending, keep investing in those new houses, in the new public transport, in the primary care centres and hospitals, because all of that creates jobs in construction, but also creates tax revenues and social infrastructure too. The difficulty that we have is we don't really know yet what the external policy environment is going to be like. We're a country of 5 million people in a world of 8 billion. We're one country out of 200, and there's two things that we don't control. One is what central banks do. And if you go back 10, 12 years ago, the reason why we had austerity in Ireland wasn't because it was a policy choice. It was because there was no choice. We couldn't borrow money from the money markets, from the bond markets. We had to go to the IMF and the ECB, who were the lenders of last resort, and they attached very strict conditions. So austerity is never a policy choice. It's something you do when you have no choice. I think this time is going to be different, that central banks will have a very different attitude, that it will still be possible to borrow very cheaply. And that means we'll be able to avoid austerity and instead stimulate our economy, which would be the right thing to do, I think, once the health element of this crisis is over, the pandemic element. But beyond that as well, there's one thing we don't know as well, is what's going to happen in terms of global trade. And there is a move around the world back towards protectionism, putting back up borders, this idea that every country should make its own stuff. That's a very dangerous move for Ireland if that happens, because we're an export-led economy. Whether you're a farmer in the Midlands or whether you work in a multinational in D4 or in Ringaskiddy, 90% of what we produce is exported. And if we enter into a world in which free trade is reduced and deglobalization is a feature of the post-COVID world, that's one in which Ireland will struggle. So I'll be working to make sure that doesn't happen.
Can I just touch off on your family as well? Like your top to ceiling medics at the coalface of all this here and in England. How are they all getting on with it?
They're doing okay. They're all in different roles, obviously. So my brother-in-law in England is in an NHS hospital in the East End, and he's a geriatrician. So I think he's the one who's the busiest and the most exposed, seeing COVID patients every day. And it's been interesting. I kind of try to touch base with him at least once or twice a week, just to kind of get a sense of what might be coming our way. And that's been really, really interesting and informative. He found it really tough at first. But, they're starting to, sounds terrible, but they're starting to get used to dealing with COVID and COVID patients coming in. And it does seem to be stabilising in the UK a little bit now, at least. Now for my partner, Matt, he works in St Vincent's, and what they've done in Vincent's is they've split the hospital into COVID patients and non-COVID patients, and he's on the non-COVID side, but he's still seeing COVID patients from time to time. And
I suppose a risk for yourselves, if obviously living together, if he's in a situation like that, you're leading a country, because there are certain precautions that need to be taking place, or is there?
Well, again, it is a risk, yeah, but it's a small risk. But one thing I'm very conscious of is that we're asking, we're asking, and I'm asking our healthcare workers, particularly those who work, on the wards in ICUs, in general practice, in testing centres. We're asking them to take a risk every day. And that's why I think we as a society and we as citizens need to heed the advice that we're being given by our public health doctors to stay apart and to socially distance, because we see in other countries healthcare workers lose their lives, and I really hope we become one of the few countries in which that doesn't happen.